Welcome to GOODER Stories, where strategy meets heart. I'm Gail Hataitham, founder of GOODER Creative Studio, a branding studio that partners with nonprofits and purpose-driven brands to tell impactful stories through thoughtful, eco-conscious design. Every other week, I sit down with changemakers from across Canada's nonprofit world to explore how marketing can move missions forward. This podcast is here to help you share your story with more clarity, creativity, and confidence. Today, I'm so happy to be joined by Michelle Wagner, a Prosci-certified changemaker who runs Michelle Wagner Consulting, where she helps organizations navigate complex transformations with her talent for finding the best path forward when things get complicated. Michelle has worked across both corporate and nonprofit worlds, and when she's not guiding change initiatives, you find her running, traveling, or teaching trauma-informed yoga, bringing the same thoughtful people first approach to everything she does. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gail. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning.
Yeah. In today's conversation, we'll explore Michelle's insights on how effective communication can make or break change initiatives, particularly in the nonprofit sector. Whether you're leading a big shift in your organization, working with diverse stakeholder groups, or trying to keep your team motivated during uncertain times, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Michelle, can you tell us a bit more about your role as a change manager?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks again for having me here this morning, Gail. It's such a pleasure to be able to be part of the podcast and to be able to speak to your audience. For myself, I have loved change, have had a career full of change. And while I feel that many people find change to be a little bit scary at times, my role as a change manager is to come in and build a uniform or a unified process so that change isn't as scary for people and that they have the ability to find a way to incorporate it into their day-to-day lives. And so as a change manager, an organization will hire me to be able to understand what that change process is going to look like for whatever type of change they're looking to initiate. So it might be a brand new system, it might be a revision of a program or a revised process that they're implementing within their organization. So all of it is something that I love, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about change today.
Awesome. And I know that right now there's so much uncertainty in the economy and politics and all that. So what advice do you have for leaders who are struggling to navigate and communicate change within their organizations?
Gail, that's a really great question. And there is a lot of uncertainty that's happening within our environment and within our society right now. And I think if a change initiative is being proposed or has been initiated and a leader's struggling to be able to understand how to build momentum or to be able to move that forward, I always think it's important for us to take a pause and just understand the full nature of the change and what it is that we're asking for our employees to be able to do. And at times, sometimes it means reprioritizing and being able to understand the amount of change that's happening and breaking it down into more digestible pieces. Because as employees of an organization, there might be a multitude of different changes. And I use that word loosely because I think there's so many different things that are happening in our society that we perhaps are a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of change that's going on, whether it be personal as well as at work. And so for leaders, just to be able to understand and reassess, reprioritize if necessary, any of the change initiatives that are happening in their organization. And then as well, just get really crystal clear on the purpose of that change, being able to clearly communicate that why and what's the value for people to be able to change within that purpose and helping guide employees and navigate them towards that final result.
Those are great advice. Reprioritize. Make sure you're clear with your why and communicate effectively. Breaking down the steps there, those are important because it can be really overwhelming for sure.
Absolutely. It can be very overwhelming. And as soon as people hear change, sometimes people, if they've had a negative experience with change, sometimes they automatically start to feel their heart racing, or they just have a bit of a sense of urgency around, oh my goodness, what's going to change and how is this going to impact me? So that ability to be able to lessen that response is always advisable.
Oh yeah. Change is scary, but it doesn't have to be. Change can be a good thing, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So from your experience working in both corporate and nonprofit settings, How does communication around change look differently between the two?
Oh, Gail, this is a really good question. And I have been lucky enough to be able to work within both sectors. And I would say that within the nonprofit sector, it can be a little bit easier to actually communicate change because employees are typically part of an organization because it's purpose. And because employees within a nonprofit are typically purpose-driven individuals, it becomes a little bit easier to communicate that change because people understand the reason they're there, the purpose of what drives their work. And so by being able to have that clear and concise why towards why we're changing, what is going to be changing for the employees, it makes it a little bit easier to drive that change process within the nonprofit. Whereas I find within the corporate sector, it can be a little bit more challenging because people are part of a larger organization and they have a function and they don't necessarily see the same sort of purpose within the organization. And so you might be an accountant in a large organization that does something, but you're the accountant. And so how can you draw them up to those strategic goals and strategic initiatives so that they understand the purpose and why the change is necessary for their role?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I guess like because people working in nonprofit, they're more invested in the missions already, right? So they are more willing to go forward with whatever is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Purpose-driven individuals, a completely different way of operating.
So I'm wondering, like, how do you identify and nurture the change champions in the team? And how do you address concerns or resistance from those who are hesitant to embrace the change?
Yeah, and I think we touched on this a little bit when we started to talk about just that perception of change and that people can have quite a bit of anxiety as soon as that word of change is mentioned. And so for those people that are adaptable to change and that they don't have that tendency to be anxious right off the bat, the ability for the change agent or the manager to be able to help use those individuals as ambassadors in the organization. So really equip them with the purpose of the change and being really crystal clear on that why, and allowing those individuals to be ambassadors throughout the organization because they'll spread the word or they'll help other people understand the importance of why something's needing to change or why that shift is happening. And for those individuals that might be a little bit resistant, it's interesting because as human beings, we're always a little bit cautious about that resistance. And we feel that, oh goodness, like this might not go well if someone's resistant. But if we anticipate and know right off the bat, there's always going to be individuals that will have questions and have hesitation. And so really harness that energy and be curious. If one person has that hesitation, I'm sure others have that hesitation as well and might not just be as comfortable or as vocal. So really dive into the questions and the curiosity with those individuals to find out, why are they hesitant? Was it because of a past experience? Was it because of, another initiative that didn't come to full fruition of activities? And so dive into that and help the person understand and bring it back to the purpose. And at the end of the day, those individuals quite often will start to shift their perspective and understanding how it potentially could improve their day-to-day operation.
I love that approach. So what are the biggest communication challenges that you see with today's hybrid work environments? And how can leaders turn them into opportunities?
I love the hybrid work environment. I think it's created so many unique opportunities for us as employees and organizations or as consultants that are working on a variety of different projects because it's opened up a whole new avenue to work with a variety of different people and companies. The one challenge that I see with that is that we haven't gotten rid of any of that busyness that happens. And so, especially from a change perspective, we need to be really strategic with our communication and make sure that we have that ability to communicate the right pieces at the right time. And so I'm a big proponent of being able to host really important conversations in person. But when that busyness takes over and it can be difficult to find that in-person time, it's drawing back to those, general principles of communication and allowing people to use multiple channels to reach different people. So I think being able to understand your employee population and knowing, the culture of the organization, past change initiatives, and if they were successful versus unsuccessful, understanding some of those neurodivergent employees that might need different ways of communication, and just using multiple channels to be able to communicate. So maybe it's starting with an overall in-person team meeting and then moving to an email to follow up, then maybe having one-on-one sessions just to ensure that some of those messages are heard, or if some of that hesitation is starting to creep up, that there's an opportunity for people to have that Q&A with people, with individuals that they trust and they have that rapport with.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, like, what would be kind of like the timeline usually for change to happen? Like, if an organization prepare for a change, what's the timeline that they should expect for that period of shifting and transformation?
Ooh, that's really difficult to estimate in advance because it does really factor into the readiness of the organization for change, the past culture of change, and how that looks. So for some organizations, it might be a couple of weeks, whereas for others, it might be a couple of months just to be able to initiate and start to slowly get that information out to prepare employees for the change and start to implement some of those training principles, as well as just continuing that communication channel along the way.
So, like for nonprofits, they have so many stakeholders, board members, staff, volunteers, donors, and the people that they serve. Like, how do you keep the message clear and meaningful for everyone?
Well, I think that comes back to some of that strategic communication and understanding that individuals within the organization, that everyone might need a little bit different type of information or some key information that's going to help them be successful. So if we're chatting to board members, it's keeping the information very clear and concise around how, when they're on the community, they have the ability to talk about the change that's happening at organizational level. If we're communicating with leaders, it's the ability for leaders to have the information they need to support their employees during the change. And so they might actually need a little bit more information or a little bit more training around the change continuum and what that looks like, and to be able to help people understand what change looks like. And then for employees, those some of those bigger details on, well, how is this going to impact their day-to-day work environment? How is this going to impact the processes that they have now? And what are we working towards in the future? And what's that common goal that we're working towards? And so with any of those channels of communication, it will be slightly different, but just being very strategic overall with your approach and knowing that ahead of time and building some of those messages and getting them out early.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned before that like keeping the momentum is difficult. It can be tough, especially when the resources are tight. What are the strategies that you can keep people engaging and moving forward, doing the change with like confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. When we're moving some of those things forward, like it's really important to be able to celebrate some of those smaller wins, or even just celebrate the journey and celebrate the process. And keeping that communication transparent, keeping the communication happening often, and constantly checking in with individuals to find out, how things are going, how things are doing. I think those are some of the key things that we can do throughout the change process.
Open communication.
Absolutely.
Change can be hard on everyone, including leaders. How do you personally stay resilient and focused through it all?
Ooh, another great question, Gail. For myself, it's really all about self-care. For myself, I am a big runner. And as my running coach had said to me, and I think I might even offer it to anyone who's leading a change in an organization, is that sometimes it's just one step with the left foot and one step with the right foot, because we have the ability as individuals to be able to move things forward. And sometimes we need to pause and take a break and walk during that run. And other times we have a really clear vision and we know exactly where we're going and we can keep moving forward. And so when I think about, the resiliency and the things that I do for myself, it's being able to run and just have that break and have that energy. I also volunteer in the community just to be able to disconnect from the day-to-day and to be able to help others. But just generally speaking, it's just a great opportunity, just to be able to build that network around you of individuals in your own support system, so that when things can be a little bit challenging, that you have that sounding board and those people to be able to reach out to and say, you know what, I didn't have a good day today and I just need to talk to someone. And so if we have some of those circles built in advance, then it's, much easier for us to reach out and say, have had a bad day and recognize that it's okay to not be okay. Like those days happen to us all the time. And I think we really need to make that normal.
Yeah, great advice. Let it be okay when you're not okay. Yeah, self-care is so essential. Like, and I feel like sometimes we just too busy and we overlook that. And we get into this spiral of things. Just take a pause, like you said, step back. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. Looking ahead, what communication tools or trends do you think that could be really helpful for nonprofits to navigate change more smoothly in the next few years?
Oh, yeah. In the next few years, like I do see that we are headed into like an environment or an area where there is a lot of change happening. And even when we just think of the things that's happening in our environment and how quickly technology is advancing, or like just all of the social media and how quickly things are happening around us. And so, when at all possible, to be as strategic and to be able to plan for that change as much as possible. Understand your organization's culture. If possible, hire that change manager or project manager to be able to build like a strategic process so that there's stage gates and that you can easily communicate that to employees, while understanding that change isn't a linear process and anticipating that one day, you might feel like you've made 3 strides, and then the next day you might feel like you've made 2 strides backwards, and that's okay because that's just part of the change process. And then just really being able to build that purpose and understanding how it's going to drive forward and continually communicating around the purpose and the mission of the organization and how these initiatives are actually going to help our community and the people that we serve to help them at a greater extent than what we're doing right now.
Besides that, I think, is there any tools that might be helpful?
Well, I know that within AI for myself, I've played around with the chat GBTs and Gemini and some of those other things around the change management process. And I've just started to use some keywords just to be able to understand like what type of information does it give me. And so while I think that it can be helpful to offer a bit of that framework, especially for an individual that might not necessarily be familiar with some of that change. It still needs that in-person intervention. But I think that knowing sometimes that budgets can be a little bit strapped, being able to use some of those other tools to understand the change process or where some of those starting points can be hugely valuable to be able to set you off on the right foot.
Exactly. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today. Your insights into leading change through clear, intentional communication and your ability to inspire teams and communities are truly invaluable. If people would like to connect with you or learn more about your work, where can they find you?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn and to be able to reach out through Messenger on LinkedIn.
That's good. Thanks again for joining us today. And for those listening, I hope you're walking away with actionable ideas and inspiration for your own change initiatives. Remember, whether you are working with staff, volunteers, or the broader community, how you communicate can determine whether change sticks or stalls. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a fellow nonprofit marketer, and stay tuned for more conversations that help purpose-driven organizations grow their impact through better marketing and communication. And that's a wrap on another GOODER story. Until next time, keep making stories worth sharing.